So my name is Sam Ewen. I'm with CoinDesk. We're here to talk more about the metaverse with some amazing people. I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Blondish over here on my right.
Hi guys, how's everyone doing? I'm so excited for this week. I really feel like it's a pivotal moment in our history. So I'm really happy to be here with you guys. And I'm Blondish. I'm a DJ, producer, environmental activist. And I really just want to change the world and change these systems. And I think that's why we're all here right now.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, my name is Paul Gambill. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of a blockchain-based company called Nori. Our mission is to reverse climate change by pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and we record that carbon coming out as NFTs.
Amazing.
Hey, hi, I'm Mathieu. I work with Sandbox. I'm a board member and advisor. Yep.
All right, and again, I am Sam. So, first of all, GM. Say it back, GM. Thank you. So we just heard a pretty deep dive into the Sandbox. I want to talk a little bit more about the metaverse in general, and sort of what it means, I guess, to be human in it. And so I think there's some interesting stuff to discuss. The first thing, and Mathieu and I were talking a little bit about this earlier, but we were talking about the fact that right now so much of the metaverse dynamics is built on gaming. But I'm actually very interested in all of your thoughts about what it means to do things that are not gaming, and to, what is utility, what is work, what is life in a system where we are spending so much time in a hyper-real environment. I'll start with Mathieu.
I mean, you just said it. I think it's everything that we do in the real life, I think we're going to end up doing in the metaverse. So yeah, working, having fun, watching movies, meeting people, dating, working, learning, all of this. Maybe go on vacation. I think it's going to reflect the real world.
Blondish, what is your thoughts around what it means to be sort of having collective opportunities in the metaverse that is not gaming focused, but maybe more art focused or community based?
Yeah, sure. I mean, everyone right now, because of our limited technologies, we think of the metaverse as this thing over there. And eventually, we have our real life, we have our physical life, and then we have our digital life, and then we have those two things merged. That's how I see the metaverse, right? When they're completely aligned. So in my world, we need to connect to ourselves, and that's kind of a lot of what I do through my music, is try to help people connect to themselves. But in this physical world, in the structures that we kind of were built on, when you say the word meditation, people kind of in our society, they kind of judge it. So in the metaverse, I feel like we're approaching it in it's more freedom. There's a lot more possibilities. There's abundance. It's like the wild, wild west. And there's endless possibilities in there. So with Sandbox, the world I'll be building, will kind of, through NFTs and everything, harness ways to connect to yourself. You know what I mean? To work with energy. And I feel like when we are our first contact in this world, everyone's there with an open mind. So we can approach it in a different way,
Paul?
The thing that I think is really cool about the metaverse is so we're here in Miami right now, and we're in the U.S. and we're in a developed part of the world, and tech is just kind of a part of our lives. But it does feel like a somewhat separate thing from normal life. But for people in developing parts of the world, where the metaverse represents a lot of new opportunity to participate in ways that they never would be able to because they live under an authoritarian government or a patriarchal regime or something like that. It's going to be truly life-changing for those people long before it is for us here in the U.S.
It already is.
Yeah, exactly.
So just to, I guess, go down that hole a little bit farther. I mean, one of the things I think is interesting is when you jump into a lot of these metaverse spaces in a CryptoVoxels or some of these platforms, sometimes they're busy and sometimes you're the only one there, right? So how do we sort of foster better community in these spaces and create more of a sense of, I guess, presence as opposed to just walking around, looking, flying? What's the unlock we need to think about?
I think it's obvious. It's gaming, and I think everyone enjoy gaming for thousands of years. It's something that every human being really is good at, and we think, yeah, gaming is the way to get people into metaverse.
I have an opinion on that. So I don't play games. I haven't played games. I've been creating in the real world, right? But now now I am using game theory because I'm on all these Web3 like riddles and stuff going on in Web3 world. But the Web2 world doesn't really understand that. So I think our role as musicians and creators is to gamify culture. So that's what I'll be focusing on.
Yeah, in addition to that, it's gamification, but it's memification too. It's that like cultural thing that people can latch onto. And so, I mean, just relevant to what we do at Nori, like what we do is work with farmers who are pulling carbon out of the air and sequestering it in their soil, but that can be attached to things that happen in the metaverse. So you can be participating in the metaverse and having a real world impact at the same time, and see that duplicated in what you're doing, like inside the sandbox. So we've barely scratched the surface on what's possible there.
One thing I would add as well, I think we all have to remember that we are very, very, very early on in the crypto space. I'm sure you've seen this graph, going around on social media over the past few days, and it shows that the adoption curve of people in crypto is about where the internet was in 1998. So it's still very, very early on, and I expect, 5, 10 years from now, you're going to have billions of people in crypto and in the metaverse.
Billions.
Billions, yeah.
All right, that's your headline. Were you going to say something about this or no?
You want me to say something?
No.
Well, no, I mean, I just have a little bit to add to that is because, like, I have a community, right, of fans as an artist. And my motto for everything is, like, let's evolve together. But there's such a small portion of us in this Web3 world right now. And I'll just address it as Web2 and Web3 just to make the distinction. But the question is, how do we bring the Web2 people over? So it's giving them familiar things and incentivizing them. So that's kind of what I'm doing with my token-ish is like, how do we get those, like only 5% of my fan base is in this world. So with Pools, it's a new social token issuance platform. Like I'm working with them in the Web2 way to give those fans and community like something familiar and then transition them to the Discord and like all those, those rabbit holes where they can really find their space in the community.
With your audience, when you play a live show, you see the energy. You feel it. It helps probably inspire how you create. So, how far do you think we are from having that sense of presence in these virtual spaces?
Like actually the community hanging out? Well, hi, Michael. There's Michael Wagner from Star Atlas. Good guy. I don't know. That's more a question for him. I'm just going to keep creating. And, through NFTs and everything, we can really start transitioning people. And also through DAOs, once you take your brand public through a social token, let's say, and you create a DAO that has a treasury where, your fans and your community own their favorite artist, then people will start to get it because then they're getting value out of that system, and then they want to know more because if they're getting abundance out of that and they're getting something out of it, then they'll want to know more naturally. I don't know. We need smaller technologies and stuff.
Right. With Mathieu, you mentioned there was 166,000 plots of land. There is, 3 million sand tokens?
3 billion.
3 billion, okay. Yeah. What happens when they're all taken by whales?
I think, I'm sure, we want this to be also a dynamic ecosystem, so people will resell them. It's not because you own a plot of land that you own it forever. And again, you can still play and enjoy, the sandbox without owning land. You don't need to own land to really play in the game, so we're not that much concerned about it.
I guess when I think of Metaverse as being a community, an economy, and a platform, that the economy often mirrors the economies we deal with in real life, which have equity issues. So I guess I'm just wondering, how do we create a sort of more equitable metaverse than we have a universe? Any thoughts, anybody?
I think I've seen a lot of, there's a really great book called Radical Markets that I would really recommend reading with different ideas on how you could apply different like land taxes where people are using the land and paying for that, but if they're not going to use it, then release it so that it goes back to and is sort of collectively owned. So I think there are different just like design principles that you can put in place to make that more fair going forward.
One thing about Sandbox, I think we've sold about half of our land, and not everything is up for sale. So time will tell.
Are there opportunities for additional worlds as well?
I mean, in Sandbox, not at the moment. We're very strict about having a finite amount of plot of lands, so nothing yet.
So you talked in the previous panel about interoperability, and I think we could talk a little bit more about that. It sounds like you guys believe very much that all the different sort of multi-metaverses can exist. Can you expand a little bit more on what it means to be a creator, and BLOND can port her experiences anywhere she wants?
I think it's very much like in the early days of the web. You had two different visions, and you had the AOL of the world, and they wanted to build a gated community with their own proprietary technology. And on the other hand, you had people who believed in the web and an open web and building websites, and we know who won. And I think it's going to be the same with crypto and the metaverse. I think it's going to be open platforms and open systems that are going to win.
I have a question. Like, I'm building my world in Sandbox, but there's so many other people creating in different metaverses and stuff. But how are we going to connect them together? Because we're gamifying this whole thing, right? So how do we?
I think so. The Sandbox, like many other metaverses, are built, on open and standardized technology. So even if we wanted, we cannot really prevent people from importing or exporting the assets from the Sandbox to other systems. And
teleporting? Will there be some sort of teleportation?
I think you just need to sign in with your, for example, with your MetaMask account in another system, and then you can import your NFT. I mean, from a visual perspective, you may need to adapt it, but the ownership is still going to be yours, whether you're in Sandbox or other metaverse.
So the Nori house in the Sandbox can be in Decentraland as well, if the user decides.
Yeah, I mean, the core of these things is that it's tied to your wallet identity, and you can mix and match and have them in multiple places simultaneously too, if you've acquired that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I would like to know more about how you're removing the carbon. Are you actually removing the carbons? So yeah, KlimaDAO?
Yeah.
Okay, so everyone invested in it, but they have no idea actually. I mean, a lot of us is like, okay, what happens to the carbons? You know?
So in the world of carbon offsetting, carbon removal, there are different types of offsets. There are projects that avoid or reduce future emissions. So somebody's doing something and saying, because of this, I'm going to emit less carbon in the future than I would have otherwise. And then there are projects that are actually removing carbon that's already up in the air, pulling it out and sequestering it into the ground. That's what we do at Nori. We do that for now by working with farmers who are changing their farming practices. It's increasing the amount of organic matter in their soil, and that is the carbon. So it's pulling out past emissions. What KlimaDAO is doing is they're buying up offsets that are the first type that are avoiding future emissions, and they're buying them through an offset registry, and then they're holding them as backing for the bonds that they're issuing. What Nori is doing is a little bit different, where in our market, people remove carbon that gets measured and verified and then recorded as an NFT, and then those NFTs representing the carbon can be sold to buyers that are trying to offset their emissions. So in a lot of cases, that could be businesses trying to be carbon neutral. We've worked with a lot of NFT artists who have wanted to make their drops carbon neutral or carbon negative. We are integrated into a bunch of different NFT marketplaces so that can happen automatically. and they're paying for that, and then they own that carbon forever. So there's just like a little distinction on, with us, you're buying that NFT, and it's yours forever. You can't resell the carbon, because we believe if we're going to be serious about climate change, we should design our system so that every new dollar spent results in net new carbon coming out of the air.
I would love to collaborate with you because I want to make sure my land and everything, all our, that's a part of my ethos. I also have a nonprofit called Bye Bye Plastic. So we're in line. So I want to make sure my Sandbox world is carbon negative, even carbon positive.
Yeah, we can do that.
Perfect. And all artists,
Yes.
all artists who, if we're really in this together. Boom. Give me a high five. High five.
Yeah, sorry. My co-founder is talking to me from the audience.
Hey, co-founder. I put it. Yeah, there you go.
Sorry. Yeah. So. Yeah, I'll say it louder for you. So we already do this. We do partner with Sandbox, and so Sandbox is tracking emissions and then buying the carbon from us and doing that every single month. So to have their operations be carbon neutral.
Let's double down on that.
Yeah, let's do it.
In.
That's what's so cool about this metaverse opportunity. Is it's this new sort of like cultural activity of people interacting with each other, but also having like an actual impact on the real world. It's not just like disappearing into the internet as like an escapist thing.
Accelerated action that leads us to freedom.
Yeah.
I hope. Yes.
One thing I will add about speaking of the environment impact of crypto and metaverse in general, as you know, Sandbox is migrating to a Polygon soon. So the impact, the environmental impact of Sandbox is going to be greatly diminished, and overall, Ethereum is moving to a proof of stake probably in Q1, Q2 next year. So it's called the merge, and it's the environmental impact of Ethereum is going to be divided by 1,000 or even more. So that's also good for everyone.
So why not? Sorry, I have taking your role. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Mathieu, I just want to ask: are there opportunities for, or has the Sandbox been talking with some of the other metaverses to sort of create a coalition that says we collectively, as more people come on, want to ensure we're not harming the planet?
Not that I know of, but at the Sandbox, we're very serious about making sure we're doing the right thing for all of us.
I think that comes from cultural pressure. It's like these things are happening. These artists, these creators, these platforms are wanting to do this because it's the users that want that. And we've seen that cultural shift change and happen over the last 3 or so years. And so it just seems inevitable that in the future, everything that we do as part of our lives is going to automatically be carbon neutral or carbon negative. That's the only way that it's going to be possible to pull enough carbon out of the air to actually reverse climate change. So that's. I
think there's some big businesses that are betting against that. So I think everyone here needs to make sure that they're asking their platforms.
Yeah, exactly. Consumer driven.
We can just create a DAO around it. Anyone wants to create, I'm sure we're all really busy, right? We have like 100 projects going on, but we can create a DAO to make sure all the metaverses do that.
Because Mathieu, you mentioned you're excited for when billions of people are on, right? That's a ton of energy that we'll be bringing in. I'm interested in going back to one of the first comments that Blondish made. She said she doesn't play games, right? But she's building in a game environment. Is the future of the metaverse also browser-based? Or is it something that really jumps different realities from physical to digital? Anyone have any opinions on that?
I want to get off the browser ASAP. You know what I mean? There's my head, I need to get thoughts out of my head much quicker than I can type. You know what I mean? So I'm past the browser, so I hope we can move on from that very soon. That we're just going to become these robots. Even though I want to be in nature all the time, it's like this weird thing.
Do you guys think that is that a mixed reality experience? Is it an augmented reality? Is it VR? Where do you guys think?
Yes, all of it.
Right.
Yeah, all of the above, and there will be different forms of that. We can't all just be walking around with VR goggles all the time. But that's not going to work. But realistically, it's not that far away to have fully integrated human-computer connections as well. There are companies already developing that, so that seems inevitable.
Do we think that comes from big tech, or does that come from the community?
I hope it comes from the community. And I think if we all collectively we have to be careful, but we're not far from a dystopian nightmare where everything is dictated by big corporation or big governments. So I hope we take power and we create the future we want to live in.
What do you think, again, open to the panel, what do you think are the sort of most non-obvious opportunities in the metaverse? Because it's very easy to think about gaming. You mentioned dating. I think that's a little bit non-obvious for me. But,
I'll go back to one of the first things I said is it's the potential for impact for people in the developing world who don't have the same opportunities that we do in the places that they live because of economic restrictions, authoritarian governments, and so on. And it's the opportunity for them to create the lives that they want to lead and develop the new income streams for themselves and find ways to seek out the freedom that they want. I think that's going to end up being like the best lasting impact from this.
And is that about equalizing economies across the world? Like, how do you think that
equalizing
plays out?
Opportunity to develop new economies? Yeah.
Right. And that exists within the tokens within these communities themselves. As
yeah, I mean, when
Axie or something,
anyone can create like Sandbox's platform design is really awesome. When anybody can create their own game and then develop their own revenue stream and economy off of that, and it's just like it goes down so many different layers. And so we're moving past a period where there's scarcity around like how much money you have to get a business started, or whether you have the different like physical resources to start a thing, because it's all digital and you can plug in anywhere in the world as long as you have an internet connection. So that's what's truly revolutionary about this.
So Sandbox is primarily a no-code environment, correct?
Yeah. You can download the game maker or the avatar maker,
right?
And anyone can really make mini games or create their own avatar.
So any creator can, like it's BLOND. Are you thinking about it from working with developers? Or are you thinking about it working with architects? And how do you imagine the worlds coming together?
Both, because architects are not necessarily in this world yet, but there's a lot of opportunity. I just reconnected with an old friend from Montreal because he actually owns one of the biggest, he has like 140 developers with him, and they're creating the New Year's in another metaverse, of One Times Square. So, now we're connecting around these things like with old friends.
And just tell us about your process. Are you sketching on paper and handing it off, and then someone else is starting to build by blocks? Like, how do you see your world coming together?
So far, it's been a lot of me just, my ultimate vision for this world is to get to happy world. I'm not sure how we're getting there yet, but I know that the metaverse and all of this amazing stuff that we're all working on is going to get us there. So I've been just putting pen to paper on what happy world looks like, and then breaking it down into different chapters, and how Sandbox plays in like chapter 1 of that process. It's going to be called Ohm World, and Ohm is like the primordial sound which connects us to ourselves.
And tell us about the audio portion of that.
The audio?
Yeah.
I make a lot of my music in 432 hertz, and when you listen to that music, you don't necessarily know that it's in 432 hertz, but it's a feeling. And also the metaverse is a feeling. It's this where you just feel different there. Just like you were saying, like it's a new way for people to collaborate, and we're super excited with fresh energy. And that's how I approach my music, honestly, is like how does it affect, what value does it bring to the person listening?
Oh, that's great. Mathieu, you mentioned, people walking down streets and going into shops in the metaverse. It feels like a lot of the dynamics currently are about more coordinate-based, right? You can jump from place to place. It's more of a teleportation. So how do we think about the value of real estate in an open world like that?
I think it's a good question. I think people will always want to go where other people hang out. So yes, you can jump from one to another, but if the experience is well designed, if you're having fun, if you meet your friends, I think it's going to be enough to keep people, engaged and engage in your real estate.
What's advertising going to look like in it?
It's interesting because, Web 2, for example, was really built on advertising. And the way Web 2 companies really grew is they were like, let's build the audience first, let's build a massive audience, and then we will monetize through advertising. But in Web 3, it's very different. First of all, you don't try to reach out to the biggest audience right away. You try to have a niche and small audience, and you monetize it right away. So the model is upside down, and you monetize through tokens and tokenomics in general, and not that much from advertising. So we'll see. I think it's going to come, but right now we're very much focusing on building a viable ecosystem with the token.
With last week's announcement of Adidas, which you touched on earlier, the Smurfs, all these other brands that are coming in, is there any advice? You know, like how do you play within a community where, as you mentioned, they're experimenting very much?
Yeah, I think it's all about experimenting, iterating. Our environment is very flexible, so you can change things, see what works, what doesn't work. And I think brands, so to your point, we don't think of the Sandbox as a place where you have billboards, okay? But it's a place where brands can come in and really engage and monetize their audience. But it's not going to be up to us to tell them what to do.
And has there been any conversation around, you know, I buy my pair of Adidas and suddenly it pops up in, you know, like, it's like the real world and...
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've talked about it, and many companies are doing this already. I think I can see this, you know, merge between the physical world and the online world. It's really coming.
And Paul, have brands been approaching you guys and making sure that their structures are carbon negative?
Yeah, so it's just interesting for like Web 2 and more traditional companies. It's the challenge that they always have is figuring out how much carbon are they responsible for from their supply chain, from their operations. So we work with a lot of partners who help them figure that out, because that's not really what we do. But yeah, we're starting to see more and more of that. And I mean, especially when you look at like big enterprise companies, there's so many new commitments of reaching carbon net zero by 2030, 2040, 2050, and so on. They don't really know how they're going to do that. And there's certainly not enough inventory of actual carbon being removed to happen, which is what we're trying to solve, so that can be scaled up. And then in the Web3 world, it's a little bit more straightforward, because like we have calculators where you can just plug in your Ethereum wallet address, and then we can look at every single transaction and then come up with a pretty reliable estimate on how much carbon you've been responsible for it. So it's much more automatic and API driven. And that's kind of what I was saying earlier, that like, this is going to be automatic and happening. Like when you go to a restaurant and you produce a bunch of like waste and garbage, you don't see like a separate garbage removal line item on your bill. It's just built into the cost of doing business. Carbon should be the same, and it is becoming so already right before our eyes.
Blondish, any brand collaborations with you in virtual spaces coming?
Joelle, do I have any brand collaboration? I have so many things going on. Like I don't know what's going on in my brain.
Oh, good.
But I do, I'm sure. Do I? Do you remember any?
Every brand is coming to Blondish.
No, not every brand. They have to have a certain ethos. I want to align with people, like, to make sure anyone I'm working with in this new Web3 world, I really want to make sure that we have similar ethoses, similar goals to get us to that happy, happy world.
What are the threats coming? Is it the Facebooks and TikToks of the world? Is it the governments? What are our biggest threats?
Yeah, I think government, really, I think they misunderstand the blockchain in general, and they see that as a threat. So I think there is a temptation from governments all over the world to over-regulate or really step in a big time. So in the US, we'll see what happens next year, but it's certainly a threat. And BitCo as well is a threat. And we really want this space to be owned by the people. So I think time will tell.
Yeah, the threat is ownership by these larger, more traditional corporations. But what's cool is that because this isn't a scarce product or resource, if it's not cool anymore, people will abandon it and go build something new and different and move over to it. And it's so much easier to do so. You don't have the same barriers to entry as you have in like a Web 2 and traditional world. So it's a threat, but it's easily solved.
It kind of, yeah, but like when I talk to normies, like they think Facebook is the metaverse. They don't know about anything else. So we have to use our acceleration techniques with this fresh energy to kind of, get past them.
Does anyone here prefer the Facebook metaverse? All right, we have one. Yeah.
Their commercials are nice.
Right, he'll meet you out back, by the way. Just as we start to wind down, the metaverse feels still like are we even is this still the MVP or is this the beginning?
No, I think it's really the beginning. I mean, Sandbox is already very polished, And if you play inside the sandbox, it's really a fun environment. And of course, we still have a lot to do. And we have a big team. You know, we have hundreds of people working to improve the sandbox and make it even better.
Paul, any thoughts? Have we begun?
I think Blondish is right that this is still like so small and so early for the people who are like really passionate about it and in it, but it's not at the stage yet where like we haven't crossed that chasm from the early adopters to much more mainstream adoption, and I think that's probably still years away. So there's which is good, because that means there's still lots of opportunity to set this on a better path that's going to be controlled more by people and not so much by, you know, big property holders.
Yeah, we're pretty far off, but like, you know, like there's so many fresh collaborations happening in the metaverse. Like, I'm working with artists that I would have never worked with, and we're creating new genres, new ways to collaborate. You know, like Snoop Dogg's in Sandbox. I'm in Sandbox. I know his NFT guy. Now we're talking like, you know, and his NFT guy launched Kingship, the Bored Ape kind of like band. And, you know, like these NFTs, these PFPs are going to be the new rock stars, and where are they going to be? They're not going to be in physical events. They'll also be more in the metaverse. So, I mean, people will flock there through NFTs and your platform.
I think, just looking at our time, that's all we have. I want to thank all of our panelists. They were amazing. Thank you all, and we'll see you soon.